What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave. This will hopefully be my last episode with dad hair because I am planning on cutting it. It is getting pretty crazy. It's looking weird on my green screen. That being said, we have a super interesting deck for you today. This is actually a deck that I had seen online. Somebody had posted about it. They got a first place and third place finish in 2 different set championships in their local area. So definitely a solid track record for this deck, even though it's playing some cards that have fallen out of favor in the meta that were popular cards but just aren't seeing a whole lot of play right now, as well as some cards that I haven't really seen played in a deck that had any kind of high standing, particularly recently. So I think there's a lot of interesting choices in here to talk about, and it's just something different. We're in our Nightmare Before Christmas territory. It is Halloween. I've wanted to make a Halloween themed deck, but there's just not enough spooky cards. Maybe when Nightmare Before Christmas comes into the game, we'll be able to do that. But we do have a ChrisCard deck, Christmas discard, so red and green. I think it's super interesting. Before we jump into that, as always, a big thank you to the Patreons for making the giveaways on the channel possible. We're like 65 subscribers away from hitting 2,000 and hitting another giveaway. So if you haven't subscribed, now's a great time to do so. And thank you so much to the people who have taken the time. The growth on the channel lately has been phenomenal. And it's worth mentioning one more thing, and that's if you are interested in getting one of your decks featured on the channel and you've had good luck with it at your local league, you were able to win a league week, you were able to win a set championship or do well in a set championship, win yourself a mirror bell, and you played something that is off meta, something that's a little strange and weird, you know I love those deck lists. Definitely drop some links in the comments below. We may even look at doing like a featured deck list out of however many comments and doing some kind of little giveaway for that person. So if that's something you're interested in and you have a weird deck list that you came up with, drop it in the comments. I would love to look at it. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this ChrisCard list. So the first card we're going to be playing, the first 1-drop, and this is going to be a 4-of, is going to be Curse Merfolk, Ursula's Handiwork. You've definitely heard me talk about this card in other Emerald deck lists. I think it's fantastic. A 1-cost uninkable, so it does take up some of those uninkable slots in the deck pretty early on, but it is a 0-1 stat line questing for 2. Any 1-drop questing for 2 is always great, and that added ability is just going to steer into the discard focus of this deck, and that's whenever this character is challenged, each opponent chooses and discards a card. Obviously, it's only ever really going to get challenged once with 1 willpower, but that 1 challenge is going to make your opponent discard. Next up in the 1-drop slot, and our only other 1-cost character in this deck, we have Pegasus, just a better Pascal in Emerald. He is a 1-cost inkable character, 1/1 stat line questing for 1, but he is evasive, so his ability to stay alive against pretty much anything except for steel for at least the early game is pretty good. In the steel matchup, you're gonna have a rough first turn because Pegasus and Curse Merfolk coming into a Cinderella is not great, but I have seen people playing less Cinderellas or playing more aggro focused steel decks, which actually don't do as well in the early turns with less Cinderellas. Next up in the 2-drop slot, a card that I love, a card that I invested in foils of a while ago so I could play it in my Green Fossa deck, is going to be Flynn Rider, Charming Rogue, a 2-cost inkable character, 1/2 stat line, also questing for 2. He's a super aggressive character, a card that has stayed pretty relevant since it came out in set 1. Whenever this character is challenged, the challenging player chooses and discards a card, so it's going to be doing the same ability as that Curse Merfolk, but with an actual 1/2 stat line, so it's going to be leaving damage behind as well, and potentially making your opponent discard unless they do have direct removal to deal with it. Keeping on with the cards that are going to be making your opponent discard, we do have for Ursula Deceiver, a 2-cost inkable character, 1/3 stat line, so going to stay outside of that steel damage, which can be really good on turn 2. It's also a great way to snipe those steel damage cards from your opponent with her ability. When you play this character, chosen opponent reveals their hand and discards a song card of your choice. Songs are still incredibly relevant in the meta. Pretty much everybody's playing them unless they're really aggressively playing around this Ursula and getting rid of them in their starting hand, but Steel Song's typically not going to do that because they need the Steel Songs to take advantage of in the early turns to really get their deck moving. If I didn't mention, this card is questing for 1. Last up in the 2-drop slot, we have our 1/2-cost action in the deck, and that is going to be Sudden Chill, a 2-cost inkable action song. So you can sing this, which is great. Each opponent chooses and discards a card. You can sing this with Flynn, you can sing this with Ursula, you can sing this with any card that costs more than those also, but those are typically the 2 you're going to want to sing it with. Flynn's always nice to get those quests in, whereas Ursula doesn't feel as bad. You're not losing 2 lore by singing it instead of questing. but either one is a great option to sing this song and make your opponent discard some cards. Jumping over to the 3-drop slot, I've seen a lot of people on one of these. I think with the uninkable count in this deck, 1 is a comfortable place to be with this particular deck, but we have a 3-cost uninkable Anna Diplomatic Queen, 2/3 stat line, questing for 2, so definitely still very aggressive. You may be playing her later than turn 3 though, and that stat line is going to be a little less relevant at that time. And when you play this character, you may pay 2, so it's got kind of kicker if you ever played Magic, and it is going to cost you 5, but each opponent chooses and discards a card. Chosen character gets +2 this turn, or banish chosen damage character. So it's got some really cool stuff that it can do when it comes down if you pay that extra 2. And the one other 3-cost character in the deck, we do have 3 Prince John, greediest of all, a 3-cost uninkable character, 1/2 stat line, which is crazy, like not great for a 3-drop, but he does have ward, so it's going to prevent him from getting targeted with that targeted removal, particularly with steel, and also with ruby with cards like Brawl. He is going to be questing for 2, and whenever your opponent discards a card, which hopefully they're going to be doing a lot with this deck, you have a lot of discard options here, you may draw a card for each card that they discarded. So every time they discard 1 or more, you draw 1 card for each card they discarded. If you have multiple Prince Johns out, you're going to do that for every Prince John on the board. He is your main draw condition in this deck. You are not looking to quest with him unless it's to close out a game. Next up, our first 3-cost action, we do have Brawl. Definitely a necessary evil in the meta. This is the Hiram killer. It also deals with some of those other difficult characters in the early game, including Ariel. It is going to banish chosen character with 2 or less attack, straight up. So Brawl can be very good. It's definitely necessary against certain decks. In the green-purple matchup to deal with Lyle, and the Steel Song matchup to deal with Ariel. It definitely is very good. Then our last card in the 3-drop slot, we are on 4 Hypnotize, a 3-cost inkable action. Each opponent chooses and discards a card, and you get to draw a card. If you have Prince John on the board, you get to draw 2 cards, which is always great, but just another way to make your opponent discard some cards. Then jumping over to the 4-drop slot, a card that is very good in this deck, and that is going to be Robin Hood Sharpshooter, a 4-cost uninkable character, 1/4 stat line, questing for 2. And whenever this character quests, you're going to look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal an action card with cost 6 or less and play it for free. Put the rest in your discard. Spoiler alert, we are playing a 6-cost and a 5-cost action in this deck to take advantage of him, as well as all of the other actions that you've already seen. Quite a few actions in this deck, so Robin Hood is very likely to get value. And he puts your other cards on the discard. I honestly don't hate that, because if you have stuff you just want to get off your top deck, that can be good, and you are taking the best possible action at the time that you play him. Then next up in the 4-drop slot, we have 4 Goofy Super Goof, a 4-cost inkable character, 2/4 stat line, questing for 1, but typically you're not going to be looking to quest with this character. He does have Rush, so when he comes into play, he's going to be able to challenge immediately and hopefully banish something, but with 2 attack, perhaps not. He may just be looking at dealing damage to something, and whenever this character challenges another character, you're going to gain 2 lore. If you can do that more than once, you're getting an absolute ton of value out of Goofy, but even if you can only do it once, he is potentially a way to close out a game or just really keep the pressure on into those later turns. And then our 1/4-cost action, we are playing You're Welcome, a 4-cost inkable action song. Shuffle chosen character, item, or location into their player's deck. It's important to note it's this character, item, or location, so this is going to deal with pretty much any card on the board, and they are going to draw 2 cards. Obviously, it's not great to let your opponent draw 2 cards, but when you really need to get rid of a character that is in your way, that is going to be threatening your board, letting them have cards in their hand is better than letting them have a character on the board. Next up in the 5-cost slot, we are on 3 Maui Hero to All, a 5-cost inkable character, 6/5 stat line, questing for nothing. This guy does not quest because he does have Rush and Reckless. He is 6/5 Rush, so he's going to come down and attack as soon as he comes into play. He is also Reckless, so he is going to challenge a character every opportunity that he has. However, with all the songs in this deck, you can potentially prevent him from challenging a character, even though he supposedly has to, by singing a song instead. And our last 5-cost character, we have Pegasus Cloud Racer, 5-cost inkable character, 3/3 stat line, shifting for 3. He is evasive, which is fantastic. 3/3 evasive is definitely decent, especially if you're able to shift him down. He is questing for 2, and when you play this character, if you were able to shift him into play, your characters gain evasive until the start of next turn, so every single character on your board will be evasive into your next turn, which can be great, especially if you're going to be singing something right away or questing in pretty aggressively. Then one of our 2 5-cost actions to help take advantage of that Robin Hood, as well as just being good, can be sung by a lot of the characters in this deck. We do have 4 We Don't Talk About Bruno, a 5-cost inkable action song, and when you play it or sing it, you're going to be able to return chosen character to its player's hand. They are then going to shuffle up that hand and discard a card at random. Typically with the random discard, I've seen people do different things. If you're ever curious how you should handle random discard, if it's a friendly game, a lot of times people are going to let you, they just shuffle up their hand, flip it over, and let you point at a card. They'll discard that card. That would be considered at random. Or what a lot of people like to do in tournament, you assign a value of a card to each number on a die, and then you roll, and if you hit one of those numbers, you go ahead and discard that card. So they would lay it out and be like, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you roll again, but if you roll 1, 2, 3, or 4, that's the card that gets discarded. Great way to keep the pressure on and get some cheeky discards, especially if they have no cards in their hand. It's just straight up board removal at that point. The last 5-cost card in the deck, we are on 2 Dragonfire, which is a card that has definitely fallen out of favor. A 5-cost uninkable action, straight up banish a character. If you hit this card off Robin Hood, however, it is very good being able to play it for free. In certain instances, you may be stuck with the card in your hand, and then you come up against a Tamatoa or a Maui or Robin Hood or something else that is difficult to get out of your way. Dragonfire is just going to straight up banish it, get it out of your way, and keep that pressure on. Then the last card in the deck, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this deck, because I think this card is very interesting, and we haven't really seen it get played in a deck that I'm aware of, is going to be a Pirate's Life, a 6-cost inkable action song. It does have sing together, so any number of characters may work together to sing this song. Definitely not irrelevant with this deck. It makes Maui very good. All of a sudden, with a 1-cost character and a Maui on the board, you can go ahead and sing this card, and each opponent loses 2 lore, and you gain 2 lore, which is definitely a great way to close out the game. It creates a 4 lore gap, which is definitely not irrelevant. If your opponent's ready to win next turn, all of a sudden you take lore away from them, it can be hugely disruptive to their game plan. So I think a Pirate's Life is really super interesting. The person who built the deck definitely said it was a big MVP card for them. It was a great way for them to close out games or to keep the pressure on into the later turns and then close out their games in the subsequent turns. But I think Pirate's Life is definitely super interesting, especially being inkable, because you ink it if it is not good. It is also worth noting Robin Hood is hitting 6-cost actions or less, so he can potentially go ahead and hit this card off your top deck and get it into play right away, which just puts a ton of pressure on your opponent, because the Robin Hood's already questing for 2, then Pirate's Life is coming down, creating an additional 4 lore swing. All of a sudden you're 6 lore ahead of your opponent, or more if you're really crushing the game. But I think a Pirate's Life is really super cool. I think this deck is awesome. It's really nice to see so many variables when it comes to the ink color combinations that people are playing. Red green, I think, is something that has been kind of in people's minds for a long time, but never was like a super viable deck. There was a lot of different versions. One's running a lot more removal. This one's pretty aggro heavy and focused on discard. I think it's really good. I would love to see your thoughts in the comments below. If you think I should have played different cards than I did, or the person who created the deck list in this instance should have played different cards than they did. Got a 1st place and a 3rd place victory, so there's no arguing with results. But thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end. If you haven't done so, now is a great time to subscribe. If you want to support the channel in a different way, check us out on NerdCave.shop. The link is in the description below. We have some cool apparel as well as some collectibles from our own collection that you can buy over there. Thank you guys so much for your support on the channel. As of late, it means the world to me. And when you see those toys, video games, and decks featuring a Pirate's Life off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.